Hello and welcome. I'm Carly from Soundside Studios, a tarot and events company based in Austin, Texas. Even though it's still 90 degrees outside, it is technically fall here. And that means almost every evening of every week right now is spent reading tarot at events or teaching tarot to students. It has reminded me of how many people misunderstand some of the cards, but it's not their fault. A lot of our tarot cards show up in pop culture with inaccurate meanings. Sure, it does further the drama of a plotline, but as a tarot card reader, I love helping people learn the real meaning of these cards. So that's what I want to do with us in this video today. We're going to talk about some of my favorite cards, the history of why they were created, how they evolved as the artistry and thoughts in the society changed over time, and what the best meanings are today when you interpret them. This will make sure that every reading you do hits the mark with your interpretations. So let's dive in together and learn about the Tower, the Devil, and the Death card. Let's go. Let's start with the drama queen of the tarot deck, the Death card. For centuries, this card had no name because none was needed. The symbolism was clear. To people in the 16 and 1700s, they understood that this symbol represented the Black Plague, which was the disease that completely changed the social, economic, and political landscape of Western Europe. And this disease came for everybody: innocent children, dogmatic clergy members, and the wealthy aristocracy that could avoid most other inconveniences in life. So our Death card really represents change, the inevitability of it, the discomfort of it, and the universal truth that it's going to happen. I was once listening to a psychologist discussing their beliefs and their research around what could be causing the high rates of suicide among younger generations in Western countries. And one point that they mentioned is that we don't have the same coming of age rituals that we used to. It's very important when someone is maturing to have a moment when they can feel that they've really moved from childhood into adulthood. Sure, we have a graduation ceremony for college, but we also have one for high school and elementary school and kindergarten. And that only applies to their schooling. It really isn't, for most people, enough to let them feel like their roles have really changed or their responsibilities have shifted. In other more indigenous cultures in the United States or in other countries, there are more things that are designed to help an individual let their old self die and move into that path of adulthood. There's a reason for that. And that's really what this Death card is representing. It's that mental and internal transition where you see yourself in the world differently, and you know that you're able to handle what comes next because you have grown and changed. This is not a card about literal death. But let's just imagine that I'm working with a client and they did lose a parent. If they're in their 30s, this is a shock. It's a shock at any age. But if they weren't prepared for this, then the process of grief is going to be immense. We have cards in tarot that represent grief. The Death card represents the way this individual might reconfigure how they move through the world as they reassess their role and their responsibilities within their family after losing a support figure. I hope this helps you understand the Death card a little bit better. Today, there are some other symbols that represent this transition and change better than a skeleton, because that really worked for people in the 1700s. Let's talk about updated imagery. I love the decks that portray this as a snake shedding a skin, because that is very much the process here. Another good representation is a butterfly. We don't know what is going through the mind of a caterpillar when they are feeling the call to cocoon. Their entire body becomes a cocoon, and then they melt down And from that goo, they reform as a butterfly, emerging with a completely new ability and a new way to move through the world. It's probably not a comfortable process. It's probably not one they look forward to, but it is a transition point and a metamorphosis in their life. They won't be the same afterwards as they were before. And I don't know if they'd want to be. So I commend all the new authors and the artists that are re-envisioning this card with symbols that are relevant to us today so that we can communicate a message that's meaningful and helpful when we interpret the card. Now that you've gotten the backstory on the Death card, it's time we talk about the Devil card. Believe it or not, these cards are very hard to find prior to the 1700s. In the 15th and 16th centuries, tarot existed, but we don't have many records of the Devil card, and we don't know why. But there are a couple of theories. The first is that maybe it wasn't invented and it wasn't popular at the time. These cards came in one by one as artists created them and people got used to them, so maybe this just wasn't here yet. Theory number two is that maybe these cards didn't survive. They are just pieces of paper, and maybe it's a coincidence, but we just don't have any existing record of the Devil card. Option number three I find most interesting, and it's put forth by the tarot historian Mary K. Greer. She theorizes that the cards may have been stolen. It's possible that maids wanted to do rituals that would maybe make someone fall in love with them. And in that ritual, they needed to add a Devil tarot card, and it would be more potent if stolen rather than painted and created for this purpose. So it's possible that these maids would go into their mistress's tarot decks and steal the Devil card to use in their ritual. We're still researching when did this card get invented and how did it evolve, but I hope that gives you a little sense of what we do and don't know right now. When we do see this card consistently, it's around the 1700s. Many of the depictions are of an oversized human-like creature that's really hairy and even carries a club. This represented the archetype of the wild man, a fear of societies, because it represented the chaos that can be caused when a human is listening to their base instincts and not abiding by the law and the order that creates a peaceful society. During this time period, we also see some demon-like representations of the card. And that's not a surprise because during this time period, it was common to see demon-like creatures eating sinners. And this was like a visual threat that was used by the church and the government to control people and make them afraid of breaking rules so that they'd be easier to control and they'd all work together in society. So how did the wild man transition into this famous character that we have on a lot of our modern decks? Well, this character's origin begins during the battles of the Crusades. Christian soldiers marched into the Holy Land and fought the Ottoman Turks. In battle, the Christian soldiers claimed they heard the Turks screaming to Baphomet, who the Christian soldiers claim were the Muslim soldiers' evil deity god. Nowadays, we know that the Turkish soldiers did not scream the name Baphomet. They were probably saying Mahomet, the Turkish pronunciation of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. But once this idea was placed in the minds of people, it was hard to get out. And so the god Baphomet continued to be a fictionalized but very feared deity. The Knights Templar even confessed to devil worship of the god Baphomet, but all these confessions were drawn out under torture, so we really don't have to put too much stock into that. Fast forward a few centuries, and we come up to Eliphas Levi. The French occultist designed his devil card to include this character. He illustrated the most famous version of Baphomet that we have in occult history. He used it as the cover of his book, Transcendental Magic. The inspiration for the character was the god Pan or Dionysus, a goat-like god that represented pleasure. His character was a hermaphrodite. A lot of his training in salons and French societies related to the fluidity of gender and the belief that humans would really ascend to the next version of who they could be when they are no longer living in a binary gender spectrum, and instead, when there is an equal balance of masculine and feminine principles for all of us. So this character is a hermaphrodite, equally balanced between masculine and feminine parts, and the rest of the image is laden with occult symbolism. We won't get into all of those details, but I do want to point out what happened as a result of this illustration. Arthur Waite translated some of Eliphas Levi's works, and he continued the tradition of including Baphomet on the devil card. In this representation, we see a pentacle. The pentacle represents a human body, and that symbolism stretches back to the 1500s with the writings of Cornelius Agrippa. The head represents your top triangle, and then you have 2 arms and 2 legs. So when the head is over the body, it represents the supremacy of logic and thought over the body. When it's inverted, this represents the needs and desires of the body being prioritized over the logical thoughts of the mind. It's taking out the shoulds and should-haves from life. Today, when I'm teaching students how to interpret this card, I encourage them with love to let this be an acknowledgement and a celebration of what it means to be human. Embrace your desires, your needs, and your wants. Indulge yourself. Engage your senses. Be fully present in your body. Let your passion be expressed. Let your anger be heard. Let your hunger be acknowledged. These are the things that make life interesting, unique, and worth living. In doing this, it's also important to pay attention to the reasons why you're engaging in these behaviors. What is the motivation behind the action? Is this a suppressed need that is finally getting air and acknowledgement? Is this an indulgence that is getting to be expressed through a healthy outlet? Or is this an attachment? Has this become an addiction? If you can stay attuned to the differences and be honest about yourself when you acknowledge what's happening, then you're going to be able to live your life fully without the weight of guilt or shame on your shoulders. I hope learning the history behind this card has helped you see the card in a new light, because this archetype is ultimately here to offer you some good ideas and some support. Hopefully, when you see this card come up in a reading, it can help you exhale and release the tension that was holding you back from being your full, true, and beautiful self. Finally, let's talk about the Tower card. This is one of the very entertaining cards that every time I turn it over, there's typically one of 2 responses. Either I'm met with a reaction of fear and shock, or a person experiences a feeling of liberation and even joy. It all depends on the context of how the card appears in the spread and how we choose to interpret it as the reader. Unlike the Death and Devil cards, this relates not to your internal and personal identity, but rather to the external structures in your life. So this can include your schedules, habits, patterns of behavior, relationships, and even the roles you serve at work or at home. Some people attribute the symbolism of this card to the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. But if we look back at very early representations of this card, there's actually no tower. In one depiction, it's a human fighting off demons. In another, it's a human being struck by lightning. And so I think it's more important to look at the lightning in the card as a primary symbol, because this can represent divine intervention. Or if you don't believe in that, maybe this is the hand of fate or the universe making a change. In our modern day, you may have experienced this when you knew that you should make a change, but you just decided to kick that can down the road until the change is made for you and not necessarily on your terms. Good examples are when you know that you want to leave a job, but you put off quitting until one day you're fired, and then you immediately have to figure out what's next. Or think about a past relationship when you knew that you should be getting out of it, but you just held off breaking up with that person until things fell apart and now there's a bit of resentment as a result of that relationship ending poorly. When we interpret the Tower card as a modern reader, it's important to look at it as the process of deconstruction. Because we build many things in our lives. If we aren't careful, we begin to associate our identity, our purpose, and our value on what it is we do in the world or what purpose we serve, when really we're much bigger than that. The purposes we serve might shift over time. The way we identify in the world around us can change. And so every once in a while, we need to be conscientious of how we remodel the structure of our day, the people that we're around, the influences in our life, so that we can build a space that's right for us. Deconstruction is a critical part of the creation process, but we tend to fear it. Anything you build has to begin with deconstruction. If we're building a building on a beautiful plot of land, we still have to tear up the earth to put that foundation in. If we're remodeling a building, we have to tear out the old walls in order to build the new ones. The Tower is that process of deconstruction, and it is important to embrace that process. Once things are torn down, we can rebuild from the firm foundation. And that's why I love the earth that we see underneath this tower structure. So if you find yourself in a moment of transitory change and you're in a space of damage control, my best advice for you is be thorough. Tear it all the way down so that you can properly restart and build a life around yourself that best fits who you are, what your needs are, and how you want to engage with this world. If you take away anything from this video, I hope it is the knowledge and confidence that there are no good or bad cards in tarot. They are all just talking points. When you look at that card in the context of your life, you'll know if you want more of it to happen in your life or if you're trying to avoid that experience from occurring in your life. And that is the knowledge you need to have. I hope you found this history as fascinating as I did, and I want to remind you that you're a part of tarot history. When you learn about these cards, when you go to a reading, when you draw cards for yourself, you're influencing what the interpretations are and how they are evolving. So thank you for being a part of our beautiful world of tarot. So what did you think? Which card did you learn the most about in this video? Tell me in the comments. Make sure that you subscribe to this channel and give us a thumbs up on this video. Stay tuned for more super cool content like this, and I will see you next time. Happy reading!